So during the revolting period, I remember I was at a national convention of sociology, and somebody said they were talking about how they wouldn't. One guy was at Brandeis. He said, "I will not teach another undergraduate school class as long as I live. I don't have to put up with that kind of rudeness and lack of concern." And somebody said, "Well, I hear Higman's gone back to teaching freshmen." Someone told me, "You haven't, have you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, is it the same?" I said, "Of course it isn't the same." I said, "When I started in 46, I would come in and say, 'My name is Howard Higman. This is Sociology 1A, and this is the word.'" He said, "Well, what's different?" I say, "I go in now and I bend a little bit sheepish look, and I say, 'This is introductory sociology, isn't it?'" But I got a kick out of it.
In the summer of 1990, over a 4-day period, I got to know an extraordinary man. He had lived outside the city of Boulder for only 2 of his over 70 years, but he knew as much about the world, past and present, as any person I have ever met. His name was Howard Higman. I had just graduated from the University of Colorado, and I decided that I would try to learn about my impending adulthood by videotaping some of the older residents of Boulder. I figured if I could get them talking about their lives, I might find it easier to get started on my own. It was still an unformed idea, though, because I had not yet decided who I wanted to interview. Little did I know he was about to find me. One morning in June, I was sitting on the porch of my girlfriend's house when an old green sedan pulled up. The window rolled down, and the older gentleman asked in an angry tone if the plumber had come by. My girlfriend nervously responded that he had not. The old man rolled up his window and sped away. "Who was that?" I asked. "Oh," she said, rolling her eyes. "That was the landlord, Howard." At that moment, I knew he would be my first subject. Later that day, with camera in hand, I walked up the hill towards Howard's house. I knocked on the imposing yet beautifully carved wooden door. Nothing. I waited a minute or so, knocked again, waited again, and was about to leave when the door creaked open, and from the darkness inside a voice rumbled, "What do you want?" I did the best I could to explain why I had come. The voice replied, "Sounds interesting. How about tomorrow?" "Fine," I answered. He then gave me detailed instructions about returning the following morning.
You'd have to come up and set up at 7 or something. You call me upstairs when you arrive and give me 30 minutes.
With that, the door closed. I walked home, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. What had I gotten myself into? How could I actually interview him? He was the most intimidating man I had ever met.
Well, when I got here, it was in 1915. I was born on the campus.
Well, I mean, after the war.
Well, before the war, I was a graduate student, a candidate for an advanced degree.
Over the next 4 days, Howard and I sat and talked. He told me many of the stories of his life as well as some of the lessons he had learned. I quickly realized that Howard was a pure citizen of Boulder, Colorado.
In fact, my father's father was a carpenter in Cornwall, not a miner. They called them Sawyers in those days back in Cornwall, England. And that's probably why I never realized it until talking to you. That's probably when he had to give up being a miner, which he loved. Hard rock mining and dynamiting and all that. But when he had to he couldn't farm. He was in a fight with everything going on in the farm. So then the idea of coming into town and becoming a carpenter, I just realized that his father was one. The freshman males, however, had to wear little green caps, and they were called beanies. And they had the letters CU on the front of them. And if you were caught by an upperclassman without your beanie on, you were punished. And that grew out of the British tradition called hazing, which was thought to build character in British public schools. Well, it's all bits and pieces of stuff. These are just little squares of wood. These are legs of a table where I wrote my dissertation, sawed up. I learned there were a lot of things that I would never know about in college because I had limited time and I had to rule out stuff. And the things I ruled out were comic strips and sports statistics. if you have some cows and make cheese, Vermont cheese, work times cow milk equals cheese, cheese equals cheese sandwich. Okay. In 1946, the war was over, and I assumed I'd stay in the Navy Department forever, and I bought a house in Georgetown, Washington. And I had two little, 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and a wife, and I loved Washington, D.C. I expected to be there forever and be in the Navy Department. And I got a letter from Morris Garnsey in Boulder, the professor of economics, asked me if I'd care to come here as an untenured assistant professor of sociology. Well, I hope so. I mean, that I already said that's the first function of teaching, is to transmit the major values, beliefs, knowledge, information, history, folklore of a culture. That's the main purpose of education. Sigma Nu, Pi Kappa Alpha, Pi Beta Phi, Chi Delta. This is where I'd done my graduate work, and I was astounded to be invited to come here, because you never, ever invited your own graduates back to teach. That was called inbreeding. And the theory was that you didn't know any more than your professors, so they were already here, so if you came back, you didn't bring any news. You just could repeat what they already know. And that was the public theory. I figured out slowly the real theory when I got on the other side of the fence. It's very hard for someone who's been a subordinate student to suddenly be a peer, an equal. What?
You made
This.
what is
It's
it?
called batik, B-A-T-I-C-K. It's tie-dyed. You paint on cloth with beeswax, and then you dip it in dye. Where the wax is, it doesn't dye. Well, my first class was introductory Soc, and I looked younger and was younger than most of the students, because the students the same year were guys who'd been in the war the whole time. So they were either my age or they were older than I was. So I went to my first class. Oh, I went over to Ed Nix's to get a haircut. And the barber looked at me and said, "Well, I guess you're an entering freshman." And I just nearly died. I thought, how am I going to stand up in front of those guys and be the authority? So I can't believe I did it, but I did. I memorized the roll alphabetically. I came to the first class and walked in, and I walked up to the front, and everybody thought I was a freshman and ought to sit down in the front row. These guys, you know. And so I stood up in front of them. I said, I am Professor Higman, and this is Sociology 1A. Those were the numbers in those days. And I will meet you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at this time. And I would like to call a roll. Will you please answer as I call a roll? And I didn't have a pencil or paper or a book or a thing in my hands, deliberately. And I started out and I said, Charlotte Adams, here. Beverly Baker, here. Thomas Clark, here. James Dugan, here. And down the list. And they were just astounded at this creature standing up there knowing their names. And I got to one name and I was scared to say it. And I said, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's Miss Gutjar. She was a tough cookie, and she looked up. She'd been an army nurse. She looked up and said, Gutjar. I thought it was probably Gujar or something. I kind of winced at that one, but I got to the end of it. I had two things going for me. When I was born in Boulder, I had all kinds of friends in the business community because they were my Sunday school teachers 40 years earlier. They knew I was a Presbyterian and not a communist. But I didn't come in here from outside and say, that new prof in economics you got, you know, he's a commie, do you? If you said, you know, Higman's a commie, well, the upper crust knew better than that. So I felt free and obligated to speak up and defend my colleagues on this university campus and in other universities. And in fact, we used the World Affairs Conference in those days to publicly help give the students a sense, don't buy into this stuff. We had a very famous series called Communism and McCarthyism and Subversion, Two Dangers. And we had 5 speakers. One was a lumberman from California, presently known to everybody. He's now a senior senator from there, called Alan Cranston. Another was Douglas Cater of the Reporter magazine, Sidney Harris of the Chicago Tribune, a journalist, and Robert E.G. Harris, head of the journalism department at UCLA. And we had a 5-day series of panels on McCarthyism. CU, on the other hand, got its eminence from tuberculosis, because in those days TB was a great killer, and there was no therapy except aridity. Is that word all right with you? Tell me.
Is that word all right with me?
Yeah.
Because I understand it.
All right.
What you're trying to say.
What is it I'm trying to say?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. The absence of humidity. That's to be comfortable as an arrested TB, you need dry air and sunshine. So any scholar who had to leave the wet East Coast, Harvard, Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale, if he had to go somewhere, he came to Boulder. He didn't go to Wyoming or Kansas or Utah, he came to Boulder because there were people already here. It got to be called the Athens of the West.
About 7:30?
To start filming?
Yes.
Or that means you'd have to come up and set up at 7 or something?
Right.
And same rule, you call me upstairs when you arrive and give me 30 minutes?
I'll give you 30 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, have a good weekend.
All right, you too.
Okay, Jay.
What follows is an excerpt from our conversation in which Howard tells a first-hand account of one of the greatest non-events in the history of the University of Colorado.
Well, you're talking about answering back, and I didn't seem to be a very good person to tease by the revolting students. And so, consequently, I got recruited by the president at that time, Fred Thiem, to sit in on plans to try to cool the riots. Boulder did the best job of anywhere in the world in not having any violence on this campus. I say any, practically any. It's debatable about a couple of dynamite that went off and killed some people up at Chautauqua. That may have been a part of the movement. Some people planted bombs under President Thiem's car in his driveway that blew up. He wasn't in the car. But compared to other schools where there were people killed, and Kent in Cambodia, Kent where the students were shot, and Fort Collins. There's a great article on this in a British magazine called How to Save a Campus, describing in minute detail how President Thiem cooled it in Boulder. He was brilliant. And he did it on the telephone from Chadron, Nebraska, and I was physically present there with him. We were on our way up to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where he was going to attend the inauguration of the new tribal chief. We were working on a program of reciprocal Indian students on the Boulder campus, Native American students on the Boulder campus. Persuaded the president to go up and participate in this thing. There was a riot on this campus in the Old Main. The Regent Building, which Thiem was a very funny man, by the way. President Thiem was, and he said when he looked at that great hall, in Regent, where you pay, you know what I'm talking about 4 stories of balconies, and he said this was designed for student riots. There were 2,000 students on the floor down there. Yeah, 5 demands, 10 demands. And here he was. I met him at the airport, Thiem, and he'd flew in from Washington. And he said, I got to go to Boulder. My campus is on fire. And I said, no, Fred. And I said a funny remark. I said, Fred, the campus is in very good shape for the shape it's in. He said, we got to go to Shadron to get to Pine Ridge. You only had 20 minutes to get over to the plane, the prop plane that went to Shadron. What Fred did, we got to Shadron in the hotel before going on over to Pine Ridge the next day with a British journalist who was with us by the name of Henry Fairley, who happened to hear the whole thing, and that's how the article got written. And President Thiem got on the phone, called back to the building, and it was occupied. The Regent building was occupied. There was a danger of it being burnt down, like they did burn down the one in Fort Collins. People were livid with rage over the killing of the students in Cambodia by the National Guard. And there was a real high rage of tension. So Thiem got on the phone, and he said he had all his staff out on that upper balcony. Vice President Manning, Vice President Rautenstrauss, Vice President Corbridge, Vice President, the whole gang. And he said, okay, get your megaphones. Get the 13 officers on the campus, if it was 13, have them take off their guns and come out unarmed onto the balcony, stand there unarmed, and make the following statement over the bullhorn. Make it over and over and over. Say, all right, students, these are your campus policemen. These are your policemen. They're here to protect you. They're here to protect your hi-fi sets in your dorm rooms. They're here to protect your cars, those of you who have them parked here. They're here to protect your property and allow you to move safely through this campus. They're your own policemen. You can kill them. If you decide to kill them, you can. Of course you can. There are 10, 20,000 of you. There are 13 of them. But if you kill them, the Boulder police will come in. And the Boulder police will be armed. And they're here to protect your property in the rooming houses in Boulder town and around the town and in the hills and on Flagstaff and Chautauqua, and where you park at night. And they're your policemen. However, you're 20,000, you can kill them. And they can't defend themselves against you if you want to kill them. But if you do, the county sheriff will come in. He's got 185. They're armed too, and they're here to protect you as you park up and drive up Boulder Canyon and Nederland and around the mountains. And you can kill them. There are only 185 of those. And if you do, however, then the National Guard will come. No, then the Courtesy Patrol will arrive. There are 555 of those. And they'll protect you all over the state as you're driving around. They're here to keep order and protect your property and your lives. You can kill them. And when you do, in will come the National Guard. And when it arrives, you can't kill them. And you'll be the ones that arm the campus. Now, if you want to arm the campus, do it. You can't kill them. Okay, Manning, start over. Get your bullhorn. Say, okay, here are the 13 campus police. They're not armed. They're here to protect your... He went through the whole thing again. And he went through it again, and again, and again. Starting at 11 at night, 12, 1, 2... Meanwhile, Governor Love had moved up to Boulder with the National Guard and had taken up a headquarters in the Wardenburg building. President Thiem got on the phone and said, John, this is Fred. It's my campus, John. It's my campus. I want you to get out of there as fast as you can. I don't want one student on this campus to get wind of the fact that you brought the threat of force and violence onto this campus. It's my campus, John. I didn't hear John's side. Governor Love, it's my campus, John. Take your guardsmen, shut down your office, go back to Denver, leave me in charge of this, John. It's my campus, John. John, I want you to leave my campus now. John. This went on for 30 minutes. Slowly, Governor Love, couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but he was parked in his new office in Wardenburg building. He talked him off into leaving. And I never saw anyone win by pleading weak. And what he told all these students is how weak he was. My 13 unarmed policemen against 20,000 rioting students. Would you feel brave and proud of yourselves if you kill those guys? How are you going to tell your kids about it? How we killed those 13 policemen. Who? Oh, we 20,000 young men. And he went on and on with the bullhorn, and slowly people started to leave. And about 5:30 in the morning, something like that, they looked around. There were only 72 left in the place. There'd been 2,000 in there. And they looked at each other and said, "Let's clean up the mess and declare a victory." Went, yeah, laughing. And left. And it's all written in a book, in an article which I'll give to you if you want to read it. And it's called "How to Save a University," and it's all about Fred Thing's miraculous defusing of the violence when other universities were in real trouble because they fought. And every piece of attempt to use force resulted in the students escalating their force. You see what I mean? And this just diffused it. I mean, and they saw the silliness of the whole thing. And then we had, when the students started to riot, he called a meeting of the leaders of the riot in Mackey Auditorium. He had the entire faculty in the lower floor of Mackey at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. And then he invited the balcony to be entirely full of students, and he hired a sound truck outdoors. So a couple thousand, 3, 4, 5,000 students were out there on the grass, listening from outdoors. And then Thiem presided over, and he arrived in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, no necktie, no jacket, and said we were going to take motions. Bit by bit, sympathetic faculty got up and made motions. And the motion was, we will never buy anything more at Wynne Kinsley's. The capitalist structure is decadent and is exploitive, and all those in favor, and then they would pass, the motion would pass, the faculty would vote for the motion, 2,000 to 8. And they'd record it. Thiem was just calm as a cucumber and say, all right, next motion. Somebody got up and moved that we never ride in any conveyance that had built by a company or that had stocks in military stuff. So no one would ever again ride in an airplane built with people who had military, which is all of them. Meant you'd vote never to ride in an airplane. It would pass 2008. And then he voted, went on and on and on. Finally, Bert Morris, a philosopher, made a motion. We will never take another drink of alcohol. It's a corrupt, and the motion passed 2008. And then they voted not to wear robes at commencement. No, not to wear robes at commencement. And President Thiem said, well, that of course will do away with the custom of wearing nothing under them. And slowly the goodwill and humor got to people. They saw how silly they were being so mad at so many people. And finally, suddenly, it was the most gorgeous thing I ever saw. They all wore armbands. They had white armbands tied around their arms. They were the militant leaders, 500 students. That means they were like the French Revolution. They were the sergeants, self-appointed. They were all wearing those, the ones upstairs in the balcony, the whole balcony. So they came forward and suddenly started dropping these armbands. They floated down and lit on the faculty. And it was a sort of I love you scene. Because the faculty passed all these ridiculous motions in support of their everything they were pushing for. Which is silly. I mean, there wasn't one of them in the wide world is going to give up going in an airplane back to Chicago or driving a Ford motor car that Daddy gave them. But they were playing like it was. They were enacting this Puritan, moral, high principled position. The whole capitalist system was decadent and needed to be overthrown and everything. So, as we left the auditorium, Bert came over to me and said, come on over and have a drink, Howard. I said, I can't. He said, what do you mean? He He said, well, you made the motion that we weren't going to drink alcohol anymore, and it passed 2007. He said, oh, come on. But Fred just handled this, and nobody was mad at the administration then. Nobody was mad at the faculty on this campus. It didn't polarize into we, they. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It was fantastic. I could never have done it. I mean, the idea of using weakness as a defense is something that's never occurred to me.
To do it successfully.
Huh?
To do it successfully.
To do it at all. I mean, I gave you those bad illustrations. I wasn't gentle with the British lady or the Unitarian man. I mean, it's not my skill. It's just a fact. But I was just utterly impressed with him. I just realized how fabulous it was. And of course, he didn't get an awful lot of credit for it. You know why? He was having things not happen. And it's very hard to get lots of stories about things that didn't happen.
Right.
Stories were all about Fort Collins, and Denver, and Berkeley, and Harvard, Columbia, which Wisconsin was one of the biggest ones.
Around noon on the final day of our meeting, Howard went into the kitchen, rattled around a bit. I had no idea what he was doing, but after a few minutes came shuffling back with a tuna sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. I hope you like tuna, he said. Of all the extraordinary things Howard had said over the last 4 days, that was the most unexpected. He was, by his own admission, a man who had never admitted weakness. Now he was offering me lunch. Howard and I sat in front of the television and watched the news. He rambled on about the events of the day and his plans for the future. Although neither of us knew it, he had more plans than time. Howard Higman died on November 2nd, 1995. He was 80. During those 4 days, Howard taught me that there is always more to learn and how important it is to love the process of learning. I can still see Howard as he came through that door from the kitchen. He was a man with a very rough exterior, but inside, he was a man who truly loved the world. All that it is, all that it was, and all that it could be.
Here comes the trash man to get the trash. And he'll be making a little sound south of the kitchen. Won't hurt a thing, just be a little sound like there is in the world. Sounds in the world. Sounds in the world. Sounds in the world.
What's your favorite sound?
Favorite what?
Favorite sound in the world?
Rain.
Rain?
Patter of rain. Raindrops. Yes.
I'm not arguing with you.
Well, you said rain. I mean, so...
Well, I meant you didn't.
Huh? Well, go ahead and argue with me. I don't mind you arguing.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying why rain?
You'd have to ask some psychiatrist, I suppose. I don't know why.
I think a psychiatrist would know better than you.
I don't think he's ever limited by what he doesn't know. My favorite sound is rain. If I wake up and hear the patter of rain, the sound I like the least is like thunder. Cracking thunder, lightning thunder. I don't mind rolling thunder, like but sounds dangerous. And rain sounds massaging and comfortable. Not violent rain, not hurricane rain, but just the patter of rain. What is it called? It never rains rain to me, it's raining daffodils. Period.